Inspired, no doubt, by the song about Red Wing, Minnesota, but with some alterations. And joining me this morning, Diane Sullivan, who is alcohol and other drug abuse instructor at the Lac-Courte-Ojibwe Community College. Good morning, Diane.
Good morning, Eric.
Gee, we haven't seen each other for a little while.
It's been a few years.
I remember. Well, let's see. How much age do I want to add
exactly.
to us? A decade or so ago. How about that?
Yes.
You on stage at the Arthur Swoman Auditorium at the Hayward High School, and there you were singing. You have a wonderful singing voice.
Thank you.
And just before we began, you suggested that maybe you might become involved in some directing again, theater.
Yes, I think I'm ready to step back in. There was a time when I was heavily involved in Serendipity, and was about the only person that directed. And then I got cancer, and that kind of knocked me out of the loop for a while. And now I'm ready to start getting back in and doing shows. Those
are the days of a friend of ours, Mike Nugent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sadly, he passed on suddenly. Too long ago.
Yeah. Too young.
Too young. Yeah. And he was a great contributor to the to the community and to the theater community especially.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He had some onstage moxie.
Yes. Yes.
That's for sure. Alcohol and other drug abuse. AODA, often AODA, as it's often referred to. You're teaching at the college, and
yes. Yeah. About I'm in my second year of teaching, and a year ago, the college got the AODA program certified to do the certificate program. So it's a one-year certificate program for students, and they take 360 hours of education and skills-based stuff. And then at the end of the year, they are eligible to apply for their in-training license, substance abuse counselor in-training license.
Mm-hmm. And a year, are there prerequisites for taking the program?
There was, but we changed that. There was a prerequisite to have at least an associate's degree prior to taking the program, and we changed that over the summer, and as a result started a cohort of 9 this semester. So that really helped to bring in some people that maybe didn't have the associate's degree but want to be clinicians.
Mm-hmm. Well, addiction is such a difficult problem. What do you teach? What do you?
So there's 8 courses, and the wonderful thing about this program is it's a hybrid program, and so that means that 75% of my classes are online, and then every other Saturday we meet for face-to-face skill-based stuff. So they only have to come to campus 8 times a semester, and this type of program works for those people. Many of my students work full-time and have families. They drive in from Lac du Flambeau, Bad River, Red Cliff, so they come here from other reservations. They don't have to be here every day, which would be impossible for them. And then they have the opportunity to do most of their coursework online.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about the courses. Tell me about that.
So some of the classes that I teach in our first semester, we teach interviewing skills and record keeping, which is really the first thing that we start to do when you work with somebody. And then they have an ethics course in client rights. They have a class called AODA Rehabilitation, which is kind of a weird conglomerate of things outside, such as internet-based therapy. And so we talk about what does that look like and how would that feel to have your therapist be online, and then other things like adaptive technologies that are involved in substance abuse counseling, such as if you have a client who is deaf, how do you work with that person? And so we look at, do some research on what adaptive things are. And then we have an intro to counseling class, which covers every counseling theory. And what I tell my students is to find the theory that feels the most comfortable for you. study that, get really good at that, because when you go for a job interview, that's one of the questions that they ask. What is the counseling theory that you apply most? And I think that if the answer is, oh, I'm eclectic and I just take a little from here and a little from there, I think an employer thinks, okay, so you're not good at anything or you don't know anything. So I have them pick one and say, well, my foundation is in cognitive behavioral therapy. I think that works very well with people, but I also pull from client-centered reality therapy, narrative therapy, and so they can have the eclectic approach, but have that base. And the thing that I do with my students is their very first class in the interviewing skills and record keeping is they develop a patient profile. So they make up an Ojibwe client. They make up the client demographics, the substance use disorder, and then as we move through, because at the end of every class they have to do a project that is tied to Ojibwe culture and values. So that's why their patient is Ojibwe. So they do that for each. They do the research build for each of the classes, and then as we move through, when we get to co-occurring, even though most of them probably won't do mental health counseling with the substance abuse, they need to know what it looks like, because probably 85% of people who come into treatment have a co-occurring issue.
Co-occurring, tell me.
A mental health issue. So depression, anxiety, a personality disorder. And so we study the DSM-5. So when we get to that class, then they add a mental health diagnosis to their patient and the criteria and what type of treatment works best for this co-occurring. And then when we get to the family and substance abuse, they add the person's family. So by the time they're done with the year, they have this whole comprehensive file and approach to kind of from the beginning to the end about what they do in the field.
So you said your students create a profile of a client and Ojibwe.
Right.
And that's part of taking some Ojibwe cultural courses or as well. Obviously, Ojibwe Community College, but are you focusing intentionally and exclusively, I should say, on your students working in the Ojibwe community or without as well?
Well, most of my students want to stay. And another thing that we really emphasize, or that I emphasize, is rural issues, because rural addiction issues are very different from urban addiction issues. And so I have my students get very familiar with what are some of the rural issues. Many of my clients say that, or many of my students say they want to stay in this area, or if they're from Lac du Flambeau or Bad River or St. Croix or Red Cliff, they want to be clinicians in those communities. So, and I tell them, then you need to understand, and most of them are Ojibwe, not all, but most of them are. So they have to understand kind of what the dynamics of our families are and our communities are. And so that helps them, and then adding the rural piece.
Oh, and how would you describe the differences between rural and urban addiction issues?
Well, I think that the first one is just in rural communities, we have a real lack of access to services that people living in urban communities have. So, for example, if you need to see a psychiatrist who is one who monitors medication, we have very limited access. Yeah, exactly. And if you can find one, it's typically about 6 months to get an appointment. And so, that's the big one. And then we also know here in rural communities, lack of access to transportation, varying.
6 months to get the appointment,
yes.
an hour drive.
Right.
Perhaps.
And varying degrees of child care for people who need treatment in rural communities. So those are some of the biggest issues and differences.
Yeah. Well, as we have noted on this program and elsewhere, and I think people are acutely aware of it, or at least to some degree aware of the fact that there are serious drug problems, abuse problems, particularly with opioids, methamphetamine, and some others, and they've been causing even deaths in our community here and without. But it is not just a local or a regional or a state. It really is a national problem. What does it look like to you from your perspective? How one wonders, how did this happen?
Exactly.
I mean, I know there are cycles of drug
Yes.
use and abuse.
Yes.
But this one seems worse
Yes.
to me.
And that's one of the things that, having been in the field of substance abuse for over 30 years, some of my colleagues that have been in the field for a long time, we just talk about, how did we get here? What happened and how is this so devastating? But you're right about the kind of cyclical movements that there are with drugs. Heroin isn't new. It was very prevalent in the 60s and the 70s, and then it died out, and then as well as methamphetamine, and then they started to come back. I think, unfortunately, once it hit our younger population is where it started to cause a lot of problems. And it's not just our young people that are using it, but once it kind of hit that community or that demographic, then it got worse. But you're right, it is a national issue, and I think what we're grateful for, and this is just my opinion, thank you for sharing, is that prior to this epidemic, the people who used heroin, used opiates or methamphetamine, that was criminalized. And so those people ended up in prison with an active addiction, and that was the issue, is that they had a medical condition that caused them. It's not that they don't have to be accountable for what they did, but they're not treating that. But as soon as the addiction hit middle-class white America, it changed. So it went from criminalization to, oh, this is a real problem. We have to get these people help. And I don't care how it got here, it got here. So that's kind of where we are now, is moving towards how do we address this national problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, some identify the development of these synthetic opioids for pain medication that then were being prescribed, some say even wildly and randomly, in pill mills where doctors at various places in the country were just giving, just come and ask for them and away they go. And then they began to find them onto the street,
yes,
so to speak. And once that ends, well, then people look for something to replace that that use with. All a tragedy and wildly disquieting, particularly when we note in this community and others the death of young and sometimes not so young persons as a result of overdoses of drugs that they don't know what they've in them, what's in them. It may be this plus a fentanyl or what have you.
Right.
But, and then of course, well, so how do you approach somebody who has an addictive problem? I mean, I have sometimes find myself, having used things I shouldn't, I should say, tobacco or whatever, and say, how do I just stop, I just say, well, that's the end of that, and I've done that. But
the rest of us kind of progress through this progression.
Well, I've had family members very close to me who have had alcohol issues, and it's that bottle behind the furnace, kind of kept secret.
In the toilet tank.
Yeah, in the toilet tank or wherever.
So this is a disease that has a genetic predisposition. So we know that if there is addiction issues in a family that come along have a genetic predisposition, just like we have a genetic predisposition for diabetes, which is rampant in the Native American community. So there's a genetic component to that. For some heart diseases, there's a genetic component. For some cancers, there's a genetic component. And this is one of those that we can say, and that the research shows that this isn't just my opinion. And there still are a lot of people out there who struggle about whether this is an addiction or not. Because this is one of the few diseases where we tend to blame the person who has it. We do the things like, stop it. Don't you know you can hurt yourself? Don't you know you're hurting your family? You can just quit. And if the person could, they would. And in the beginning, so the other half is the people that say, well, it's a choice. You just choose to stop and you can. And it's not that way. In the beginning, it may have been when people start using in the beginning, it is a choice. But once they reach the point of addiction, there's no choice. It's they're caught, they're in the progression, and they need treatment. They need help.
There was a very well, there are certainly people of all walks of life. It matters not. Rich, poor, famous, infamous. I think of the singer Judy Collins. Read her autobiography a number of years ago, and little did I know when seeing her perform on television or wherever that most of those years that I was familiar with her music, she was an active alcoholic.
Right.
And for years she believed that if she just got the psychological counseling and the help that she would then be able to stop, only to understand later, but in time, that this was really a genetic problem. Her father was an alcoholic, she was an alcoholic. That once she began this genetic predisposition toward addiction was full-blown for her. But for years she believed, if I just solve these emotional problems, if I'm just in the right relationship, if I just do this, then I will stop drinking. And she found, no, that wasn't true. She had to stop drinking. And then the other things got better.
Right. And, there are people that kind of use that, well, my father was an alcoholic and my brother is an alcoholic, but I'm not, so that's the kind of downplay the genetic predisposition. And really, if I knew the answer to why some people in families go down that path and others don't, I would write a book and make a lot of money.
There we go.
I don't know why that is, but in looking at, when people say, is there a genetic component? I tell them I don't look any further than my own family. My father was Irish. My mother was Native American. So there was cultural components in terms of how drinking, how alcohol was used in those communities. So there was a cultural component, Irish, Native American. My mother was the alcoholic. My father was a normie, what I call a normie. He was a workaholic, but he had 7 children in 7 years. He had to be a workaholic. So one addicted parent, one not. 7 kids in my family. 7 out of 7 of us are alcoholic or chemically dependent, and 3 of us are dead as a result of the disease. So I don't go any further than saying, is there a genetic component? There is.
My. Yes.
And so in terms of prevention, what we really need to do with our kids, because again, then we start to have this guilt. Oh my God, I passed this disease down to my child. And they say, why don't we do that with heart disease? We don't do that with, if breast cancer runs in my family, all of my sisters were diagnosed with, and us were diagnosed with breast cancer. We don't beat ourselves up about passing that genetic disease down, but this is one that we do. And so I tell parents the best thing that we can do is give our kids the education. Do you want to roll the dice and try to be one of those ones that doesn't get caught? Or do you just kind of want to live your life the way I think we're supposed to live?
My guest this morning, Diane Sullivan, and we're broadcasting from Kubi's Coffee at the corner of Highways B and K here at Le Coudray, and it's a lovely place, and I should check out what is going. Pasta fazool today. What have we got on the menu today? That's lovely. Diane teaches alcohol and other drug abuse counseling at the Le Coudray Ojibwe Community College. Have classes begun? I've missed the start. I think so.
Yeah, we started August 27th.
Yeah,
Classes started for the semester.
Yeah. Tell me, if you would, about some successes you've seen, and what was the key to someone moving beyond the addiction?
Well, I think one of my best examples is somebody that I worked with at the LCO Halfway House, and he had come out of prison and kind of really started to embrace recovery. I think that prison was kind of the wake up call, like how did this happen? And so, and that for me, watching somebody go through that change process is very exciting. When they come in, they're like, I don't know, am I really? Maybe not. And then when you start to give them the education about, well, this is what it looks like, this is where it goes, and you have a choice. Like I tell them, there are 3 bus stops on the route of addiction: insanity, incarceration or death? Which one do you want?
Wow.
And the answer should be none.
None of them.
And then I say, then get off the bus. And this is how you get off the bus, and this is what you do. And so he heard that, and he really got that. And people who are coming out of prison kind of have a perception in their community, and even sometimes I think probation officers and community corrections really don't think people can get better or that people can change. And in this field, I can say absolutely, we can change. I did. If I can get sober, the next person can get sober. So he really embraced that. I don't want that anymore. I already was incarcerated. I'm probably one bus stop away from insanity, and I don't want. He was a father. He said, I don't want to leave my children. So he really embraced that change process. So tell me what I got to do. It's kind of like when I was diagnosed with cancer, I told my oncologist, I said, hit me with whatever you ethically, legally, and morally can, because I'm going to beat this disease, and tell me what I need to do. So I learned everything I had. And that's what I tell people too.
Yeah. Hit me with everything you've got. Do what you need to do.
Right.
Yeah. Again, Diane Sullivan, who teaches alcohol and other drug abuse counseling. Jobs. Tell me about the jobs, the work, the job prospects for somebody who's completed the program.
There's actually a lot of, and I think that this degree, this certificate program that we have can really supplement other jobs. So for example, somebody who is a social worker or somebody who is a probation officer or a law enforcement officer, if they got this education, it just really supplements what they feel and think about working with somebody who has an active addiction. So it supplements that. But for most of my students, they want to be counselors. And so they want to be that kind of person who helps to be a guide for somebody else, because that's really all we are. They come to us looking for the answers. And what I teach my students is when you have somebody that says, what should I do? The response is, what do you think you need to do? Because they're the experts in their own active addiction, in their own world. So we just kind of guide them along the path and let them be the decision makers. And it's kind of the same with anything else, is that if things go south, they don't have you to blame, because it's you told me to do this and you said this would work. And so the best response is, what do you think you need to do? Mm-hmm. Or ask their peers in a group, anybody else been in this position? What did you do, or what happened, so that they learn from each other.
Yeah. Diane, what have been the laws have changed, the drunk driving laws? Mm-hmm. I mean, like you and I'm older than you are, but we can look back at, our late adolescence, or when the first time we had a beer, or whatever. Now the rules have changed regarding, if you're pulled over and you take, you don't take the breathalyzer, you're in trouble. You take it, you might end up briefly in jail, or with 1, 2, 3, or maybe 4 or 5. You can spend a lot of time. Has that been helpful in terms of, obviously, the safety on the roads, but is that helpful in terms of alcohol abuse?
I don't know, because I think, for one, getting tougher laws certainly has saved lives. Because if you look at the statistics for people who have car-related accidents from chemicals, it goes down. And so we can say, yep, that works. But those people who have the so this is my philosophy, is a person who gets a DUI, one DUI, isn't an alcoholic. If they come in and they say, oh my gosh, it really didn't take much to put me over that legal limit. I didn't know that. I really need to change my behaviors. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call a cab. I'm going to call my wife. I'm going to leave my car where I am. I'll stay where I am. They will come up with a plan to prevent another DWI, and I never see them again. The ones who come back the second, the third, the fourth, or the fifth time, they have a problem, because anybody in their sober state would say, of course I wouldn't drive drunk. I could kill myself or somebody else. I couldn't live with the fact that I hurt a family in a minivan. And so those people continually do that. That's the problem. And it's the laws help, but oftentimes when those people get the third, the fourth, the fifth DUI, they don't even have a license. So that's not enough of a deterrent for them to take the license away.
Yeah, not enough of a deterrent to stop drinking.
Right.
Or stop driving.
Right.
Drunk.
And then the law changed. I can't remember when it was. It might have been in the 90s. The law changed where it used to be if you had a DUI, it fell off your record after a certain amount of time, so that if you got another one 10 years later, it was considered a first offense. So the law changed that if you got a DUI, they accumulate. Because I can remember when I got into the field, it was so rare to see somebody who had 3, 4, 5 offenses, unless they were like, old and had been using for a long time. But now when you look in the paper, some of these people are in their 20s and 30s with that many offenses because they stay on your record forever.
Yeah, that just isn't coincidence after a while. And you got hit that many and clearly have an issue, something to deal with. Now again, the program, for the certificate, it's a year long, essentially, 300 and some
60,
hours, 360 hours. Most of it online. So people sign up and they can
start classes.
Yeah,
and this really, like I said, the hybrid program really works for people that are working full time. I have students that have full time jobs, and so having the ability to read at home and log onto the computer when they have time. Usually it's at night when the kids are in bed and things are quiet. They're able to get on the computer and do their homework part. We have a classroom, an online classroom, where I post 2 questions a week in each of the classes, and it has something to do with what they read for the week. And then they have to respond to each other and start this forum, this discussion forum. And so that's what they do during the week as they're reading. And then the skills-based stuff is what we do when they come in on Saturdays. So they practice intake questions on each other, or they practice assessment questions on each other, and then they learn some of the skills-based stuff that they need.
Yeah. So this, I see that as you described, for somebody who's involved in, police work or teacher, people with an opportunity who have the opportunity to mix with and use this skill, a good thing. Are there people who do simply alcohol and other drug abuse counseling?
Yeah, and I have several. I have one young woman from Lac du Flambeau who's finishing up. So I had a cohort of 6 last year. 2 of them got pregnant and had to drop out of school, and one of them had some family issues. So I have 3 that are finishing up this semester. They took classes this summer, and they have 2 classes now. So one young woman is from Lac du Flambeau, and she had started her career. She used to work in a dental clinic, and then she got hired by the tribe's outpatient program as kind of like a secretary, and then kind of moved into being the intake person. So that's the person that gets the phone calls and then determines, is this person eligible for our program? And she started doing that and started the thinking like, wow, I really think I want to help people. And so when the certificate program came up at the college, she saw that as an opportunity to get the training that she needed, still be able to work full time. She has 2 children and a partner, and it's worked for her. So she has actually already applied for the test because she had training and hours before she got to us. So now that she's almost done, she's ready to take the test.
Yeah. You said that each member of your family at one time or another had suffered addiction. It's somebody pointed out to me, maybe you should join, adult children of alcoholics. And I began to think, well, why me? And I looked around my family and I thought, well, this might be a good idea. It is so prevalent, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And, of course, there's constantly now the effort nationwide to legalize the use of some, or decriminalize it at least, or as much as legalize the use of marijuana, both recreationally and medicinally. Do you have, where would such an action fit as you see it as someone working in this field?
I hate
Is
this
that
question.
okay? Oh,
No,
sorry.
that's
Don't-
okay, because
don't
people
answer.
don't want to hear my opinion. And I'll tell you, I've worked with adolescents my whole 30 years, and if I had a nickel for every kid that every teenager has told me it's natural, it's an herb, it comes from Mother Earth. I'd own my own island in Aruba right now, and that's where I would be. But what I tell them now is that the marijuana that's out there, the cannabis that's out there, is not natural. It has been genetically and scientifically engineered to have THC contents of 25% or higher THC. When I was experimenting with marijuana in the 70s, the THC content was probably about 7 to 10%. And that was the good stuff. That was Acapulco Gold. I don't know if you've
As they
ever heard
say,
that.
yeah, or Cambodia Red.
Yes,
or-
there you go. So that was the good stuff. And so now when you see, the strains that are being developed in these marijuana grow operations in states that have legalized it, they have such high THC contents. And what we are seeing, but you're not getting this published because the pro-marijuana people don't want people to know this. If you have any sort of anxiety issue, clean and sober, and you add that THC that has that high content, that creates problems, and I saw that when I was at Hazel and Betty Ford, is that there were people who were admitted where the only drug that they abused was cannabis, and there was definitely an addiction problem. So that being said, there are those, like you said, the medicinal purposes, like the CBD oil. And they're starting to have some research that shows that it absolutely does help in some ways. But the CBD oil has no, or very, very little THC content. So they take out what is good about it and develop that to help children with seizure disorders, or to help people with some other pain issues, and that is showing some success. So I don't know, it's kind of a mixed bag for me.
Yeah, well, the jury is out.
Right,
Always has
absolutely.
been. It is certainly understood that people begin to use marijuana habitually, or to a great extent when young, it does have some impact on brain development and how our synapses snap, I guess you could say.
And that's true with any drug. And now we know the research has shown that we used to think that 18 was the legal adult age, right? So you were 18, you were all grown up. And the research now is showing is that the brain's not done developing until you're 25. And so if we start using when we're 15 or 16 and still have another 10 years for our brains to develop, that's going to create a problem.
Yeah, and most of us, the older we get, we think it's still developing or diminishing in capacity, one or the other.
Yeah.
I'm not altogether certain. Diane, how to get in touch with you at the college? What's the best avenue for people who may be interested in joining, becoming a counselor or learning the skills?
Well, the best way is just to call the college, and my office number, the college is 634-4790, and then my office extension is 135. I can answer questions, or really there are people in registration that could answer questions as well.
What's the cost of is this taught on the same sort of per credit basis?
Yes, it's exactly the same, and most of the students that we have qualify for federal financial aid, and so they can get this certificate program with, they have enough financial aid that covers the cost that they have to go to school, which includes living expenses. So it's not just the credit hours that they have to pay for. Their financial aid helps them to be able to still live and support themselves while going to school full time.
I was over at the library the other day at the college, and then I was told if I wanted to, I was looking for a colleague, and what a beautiful facility. It's amazing.
It absolutely is beautiful.
Yeah. It's like, gosh, I don't know how long it had been since I'd visited some portions of the campus before. I just found it utterly extraordinary. What a wonderful facility it is.
It
And
is,
Of
and I
course,
tell
the
my
cultural center is lovely to visit
Yes.
as well, isn't it?
And I tell my students, if you just need a quiet place to read or study when you're on campus, go to the library. They have that beautiful little room that looks like a wigwam that has a fireplace in it. In the wintertime, that's the best place to sit and just study and have some quiet time there.
Yeah, one visit would have you convinced it's probably the most extensive library in the region. Isn't
Where
it?
is everybody?
It's beautiful. Quite a place. Diana, I want to just briefly, we have a minute or two left. Your son, Mike, what a remarkable fellow.
Absolutely.
A
Absolutely.
doctorate in linguistics.
Yes.
All
Yes.
out of Ojibwe language. Reminds me of the Keller Papp, who teaches at the Waduka Dotting, the
Right.
immersion school.
Who they call the Pied Piper of Ojibwe immersion education.
I'll bet he is.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
He said sometimes, some young person would say, "Well, what's the value in learning Ojibwe?" He said, "Well, look at me. I've got a job."
Right. There you go.
I'm teaching it now.
Exactly. Well, and there's a lot of research that shows that with immersion teaching is that the more, if you know more than one language, your ability to learn and take in knowledge just truly increases.
Yeah.
So it's not only saving our language, it's developing their brains in a much better way.
Yeah. Well, I think we might have less than a minute. I'm looking
Okay.
at my watch that says my clock here, 8:59, and I know we're going to be going to Democracy Now! Here in just a moment. Diane Sullivan, thank you so much. So great to see you again.
You too.
Yeah, your smile hasn't changed a bit.
Thank you.
This is WOJB Reserve Wisconsin, broadcasting from Kubi's Coffee at the corner of Highways B and K, where the coffee's on, and there's a beautiful bundt cake over there, and one of the grandmas here